Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. It's the gift-giving season, and Tea has gifted Whiskey the slasher-adjacent classic, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead. Whiskey, are you the trashiest white person we've seen in a while?
Well, I don't know. The supporting cast in this film certainly give me a run for my money.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back.
Please excuse T. He's got the virus from 28 days later, so...
Basically. Anyway, we are back with our second segment of gift giving.
Or first, depends on which order you watch that. Or I keep saying watch, listen to them.
Exactly, and if you listen to them and this is your first one, you're doing it wrong.
We're trying a new thing. This will be what we're doing next year, unless there's just tremendous backlash against us. But we'll see how you guys like it. Basically, every pairing will be uploaded on the same day, so you can choose which one you want to listen to, and we'll see how that goes. But we're trying it out for the end of the year.
We're trying it out. We're seeing how it goes. Watch, this will be the one that gets everybody to comment. And we'll be like, okay, this is obviously wrong.
Yeah, that's the one time people get angry with us.
But we're going to give quick opinions. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Netflix and Warner Brothers merger. I'm saying thumbs down.
Boo! Boo! Thumbs down! Boo!
Thumbs down! Tomatoes. Awesome. That way you know we're relevant. But today, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, the 1976 cult classic. I think it's a little bit more than that. Yeah. First off, though, before we get into the nitty gritty, Whiskey, what are you drinking?
Because there wasn't a lot of options. There's a scene in the film at prom where teachers are spiking their punch. And I asked you what they were spiking it with because I couldn't see and I didn't want to pay to rent the film again to go back and find it. And the scene isn't on YouTube, so and Google was gaslighting me and saying that the scene didn't exist. So I just had to improvise. It's Texas. What would they be spiking punch with in Texas? I just went for some Jim Beam whiskey. So it's fruit punch with Jim Beam whiskey, spiking it. And that too, I also had a weirdly hard time finding Hawaiian punch, so I just got fruit punch flavoring powder for water, and that's what I'm drinking. What about you?
Love that. Okay, so I went and I looked up a cocktail, super easy one that I found too. This is put out by the Pomegranate Company.
Ooh,
this is called a Tequila Sundown.
Ooh.
Basically it's pomegranate juice, tequila, and orange juice. To me it sounds like a tequila sunrise.
It's a tequila sunrise, but just with pomegranates instead of grenadines.
Yeah,
so no wonder they put it out.
Maybe that's what the deal is. I don't know. I forgot what a tequila sunrise looks like. Is one heavier than the other? Maybe the red sinks at the bottom. Anyway, the point is here, officially called Tequila Sundown. Yes.
Right. So in case this is the first episode you're listening to, just to reiterate what the idea for this pairing is it's December. It's the time for giving gifts. If you listen to the other episode, as a gift, I gave a bonus romantic comedy review to T, and we talked about the holiday. And so your idea, since I like spooky, murderous horror, you decided to go with this film.
Which, after it's been a minute since I've seen this, I remember liking it, which after I, watched it, just recently, I was like, I'm so sorry.
No. Well, get into the factoids, and we'll discuss further, but this is a great gift. There's a lot to discuss with this, but...
So the good news is Whiskey will not need a receipt. Okay, so I don't know if you saw when you watched it, the poster for this. I love the poster for this movie. We usually don't talk about posters, but I wanted to bring this up because the poster was done by Ralph McGurry, and he also did the poster for Battlestar Galactica, the Star Wars trilogy, he did, you know, those kind of like hand painted poster looks that are just super iconic. When you think of like,
Wait, is this the guy that passed away a few months ago?
did he pass away a few months ago?
There's an iconic poster maker who passed away, and he did do the Star Wars trilogy. So I'm wondering if it's the same guy. He did literally everything. It's crazy. Like I'd never heard of him before. But every famous movie for the last like 5 decades, he did like the posters for them. So I'm wondering if it's the same guy.
See, now I have to double check because now I want to make sure that you know, I'm not like creating random drama in here. Let me see. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it was Ralph McQuarrie.
Okay, yeah. Rest in power, King. That's crazy. I didn't, again, he did all the posters, so I'm not that surprised.
He did like E.T. He did, like I said, the Star Wars franchise. He did Battlestar Galactica.
Well, he was still working up until his death. Like, even some recent posters were him. So, like, think of a movie, and he likely did the poster for it.
Well, okay. To clarify, recently is a relative term. He passed away in 2012.
Okay, maybe it's not the same guy. This guy was literally like a few months ago, so maybe it's another guy.
No, but yeah, he did a bunch of iconic work for posters and all that sort of stuff. He did some of the concept art that helped get Star Wars sold. I keep saying Star Wars, that's like the really, really big one. But yeah, he has, if you look through his stuff, he has a great style, and he did the poster for this, and it was all hand painted. And I've always loved this poster, so I was really excited to learn that. Ralph McQuarrie, rest in peace, or rest in power, King, as you said. This movie was directed by Charles B. Pierce. You might know him. He did The Legend of Boggy Creek. He was written by Earl E. Smith. Music was by Jamie Mendoza. Oh my gosh. Okay, everybody take a shot. I can't read my handwriting again.
Aye, Captain. Also, I just Googled it while you were giving out some info. The guy I was thinking of is Drew Struzan.
Okay. And did he do the painting stuff too, or was he more like a different style?
He had quite a few. I've still got it up here. Let me take a look. Yeah, so he did The Thing, he did the Star Wars posters all the way up until like even the prequel trilogy, so the ones for like episode 1 and stuff like that.
Okay.
Let me see. The Fistful of Dollars trilogy. Again, Indiana Jones.
Okay.
I could keep going. That's part of the reason why I thought it was him you were talking about, because he's Back to the Future. I could keep going. He did a bunch of the he did. I think the thing that he was kind of known for, like I mentioned, Back to the Future and like the Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
Maybe not hand painted, but you know, like those kind of almost photo realistic kind of things that were also like Back to the Future is a perfect example where it's like it's Marty looking at his watch and it's him, but it also doesn't quite look like a photo exactly. It almost looks painted. Like that was Drew Struzan's style. So that's
okay. That makes sense. And I'm just looking back. Now that you're saying he did Star Wars, I'm just double checking.
What I'm thinking, I'm guessing the guy you're talking about, because there were also those Star Wars posters that looked, like you said, painted. Like there's the one for the original Star Wars where Luke is like holding up a lightsaber and it kind of looks like a sword. And there's like, you know, the painted Darth Vader and stuff in the back. I'm wondering if that's
what I'm checking. Okay, so
him.
It looks like, to correct myself, it looks like maybe he didn't do the posters, but he did a bunch of the concept art that got Star Wars sold. But they said that he is responsible for like the design of like C-3PO, the Stormtroopers, Darth Vader.
Gotcha.
And he did work for Star Trek. But yeah, okay, cool. He said he experienced creative fatigue. He designed the alien spaceships in Close Encounter of the Third Kind and E.T. And he got an Oscar, an Academy Award for visual effects for the film Cocoon. And he also did some work.
So he didn't just do posters. He did, because he designed spaceships. If he did visual effects for Cocoon, So yeah, Drew Struzan was strictly posters, so
Got
he's
it.
got
Okay.
that going for him. But it sounds like this guy did quite a bit more.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. That's good. Oh yeah, he looks like he did some of the effects for Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember batteries not included. But yeah, cool. So we had Shallolar, but I've always just thought that poster for the film was so iconic and so ominous, but strikingly beautiful. I kind of compare it to sort of the angel scene in Silence of the Lambs. It's disturbing. I mean, it's not that graphic. This poster is not that graphic. It's not graphic at all.
Yeah.
But it has this kind of ominous beauty to it, which I think is so good. But yeah, so again, rest in power, King. This was written by music was by Jamie Mendoza Nava. So I looked through, he done other stuff. I didn't really recognize any of the movies he done. They all had like Wikipedia pages. I didn't know any of them by name, but he also did the opening music for the Apollo 11 coverage when that was a thing, when that was on CBS, I think is what they said.
Oh boy.
So budget of this movie. Now, while I remember the first time I watched this, I was like, oh my God, this looks so bad. I watched it on Prime because Prime purchased MGM, which purchased Orion, and Orion purchased, I think it's called American International Pictures is who released this. So the version on Prime looks very crisp, but the budget for this was only $400,000. And I will say, as much as I do enjoy this movie, it's obvious in places.
Yeah.
But it was a huge success. It grossed at the box office $4 to $5 million.
There you go.
So the cast of this movie, for the narrator, we had Vern Stearman. We had Ben Johnson as Captain JD Morales, Andrew Preen as Deputy Norman Ramsey, Dawn Wells as Helen Reed, Jimmy Clem as Sergeant Mal Griffin, Bud Davis as the Phantom, Jim, I'm assuming it's City, as Chief R.J. Sullivan, Charles B. Pierce, the director, he played our favorite, Sparkplug. Robert Aquino as Sheriff Otis Barker, Cindy Butler as Peggy Loomis, and Christine Ellsworth as Linda Mae Jenkins. So that's just kind of the basic plot. Now, before we get into discussing this, had you ever seen this movie? I know you said you'd heard of it, but had you seen this before?
It's on my list. It had been on my list. It's big in the horror community. It's kind of considered a proto-slasher, which is going to be a point of discussion I will get into. I think this is an important movie, especially because, like other movies of its time, some people consider it a slasher. I will adamantly reject that claim. I think it was important to the creation of that subgenre, but it doesn't fit. But it is an important movie. It was very it was groundbreaking for a number of reasons at the time. And for that reason, I don't think it's perfect. We'll get into that as well. But it's not bad at all. I'm not surprised it did well. For the time that it came out, I think it was some pretty intense stuff that they were talking about. And I think that is part of the reason why there's some tonal inconsistencies, which is my main issue. But it's good. Again, other commenters, influencers and stuff have talked about this. A lot of people say it's like a really big deal for a movie at the time that it came out. And so it's good that I finally got to check it out. It is interesting. It's like, because, I think in past episodes I've talked about the book that I still have that was given to me by a high school girlfriend, 101 horror movies to watch before you die. So this isn't included in that, and I think that's kind of where it's like contentious. Depending on who you talk to, someone will say it's a horror movie or someone will say it isn't. Maybe someone will say it's like a budding true crime movie, which it kind of is. Like, it's sort of its own animal. It's dipping its toes in a lot of things, and I think that's part of the reason it's it is a good movie, but it's also sort of hard to pin down a genre, you know.
Yeah.
But I liked it. As far as like initial, thoughts on it, I have a couple of criticisms that I'll get into when I touch on certain things. But overall, it's a thumbs up. It's interesting, especially because it's like a true story and it's one you don't hear about a lot. I feel
Right.
like there's all sorts of true crime things you constantly hear about. Ed Gein, the Gold State Killer, the Zodiac Killer, like all of these famous killers that are from like 2 decades later after this. I think it's kind of interesting that this took place in the 40s.
Yeah.
Like you never hear about anything like this happening that early.
Right.
Obviously there were, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just the time period makes it interesting, and the fact that you don't hear true crime people talk about this case so much,
Well, and
and the fact it's unsolved.
yes. So that's one of when I was reading people's complaints, they didn't like the ending of this movie.
What are
And
you going to do about it?
right, because like you said, this was sort of a, like a true crime esque sort of movie, but it's like, we can't change the ending. He was like never caught. And what's interesting about this story also is, I think one of the reasons why it's not really discussed or talked about that much is, I think, because if you think about it, it was the smaller town in the 40s, and something like this, unless we get I feel like unless we get an explanation or somebody gets caught, so much of the story, turns into folklore. There's all sorts of discussions about stuff that may have happened, stuff that didn't happen. There's like, the official account, but then, well, Betty Barbara over here, I almost said Betty Joe, but that was an actual victim. I didn't want to say that. Heard, that it was this person, or they may have seen this. It's just so much of this gets mixed up. And because this is a smaller town with a smaller, there's no like official, there really isn't sort of like an official account. They didn't like really keep major records. I mean, they had records, but no one was like FOIing that stuff back then. No one was like cataloging the stuff. This was before DNA, so I don't think really any like evidence was picked up. I mean, there were, in larger jurisdictions, there were instances where stuff like blood and hair and stuff they would find in crime scenes would be picked up, with the hope that it would be of use at some point later, even before DNA was even on the horizon. So that is how we've been able to, kind of posthumously find out who people are. But with this small town cop mentality, there really wasn't anything collected. And there's books on this, but me as just a casual like true crime listener, when I've heard about this story, is there really isn't much evidence in the case that I would consider like hard evidence. A lot of it is basically just eyewitness accounts. What happened. The most evidence we have is they found bodies here next to this car. It's stuff like that. And I do think that's something that the movie does try to fill in for us, because to much of our understanding, most of the people didn't survive these killings. The couples that did, they're the ones who described him. Basically, all we have is it was a guy with a bag on his head. That's basically the description we have. But I feel like that's one of the things this movie does well, is it does try to fill in the story and kind of create a story. But at the same time, you're also just like, that's a problem because there's so little story there to begin with. Does that make any sort of sense? I feel like I just rambled about this.
No. And I think that's also why there's a bunch of stuff that's like filler, more or less. Like the prom scene that my drink is based, excuse me, off of. Because we don't know what was going on at prom. We don't know if teacher... In fact, that was what Google was saying when I was trying to find out what they were spiking the punch with. It was like, there's no evidence to support that, because it thought I was talking about the actual events,
right,
and not a movie. It's like, there's no evidence to support the teachers were spiking the punch at the prom, and it's so like stuff like that. We know that some of the victims were teens coming out of the prom.
Yeah.
So let's have a scene at the prom with dancing, and then let's have a funny thing where the teachers are spiking their punch.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. And it feels like, so I'll get into my biggest complaint or like criticism is the tonal inconsistencies. A film like this would get roasted on Twitter these days because, especially like, every so often on the show we talk about it, but more in private outside of the show, we are constantly, you especially are talking about your favorite showrunner, Mr. Ryan Murphy,
Oh God,
and his
yeah.
wonderful monster TV show. And you have the people that just and like eat that slop up like the good little content piggies they are, and then you have the people that are like, hey, this is a real case and real people died. Maybe we shouldn't have Ed Gein in BDSM lingerie wielding a chainsaw.
Right.
So I don't think that this film is quite that bad, but I do think there is a little bit of you mentioned Sparkplug. So we see a lot of
Sparkplug.
Sparkplug. So I have no beef with Sparkplug as a character. Frankly, my theory as to why, because to spell it out for our audience, so when we are looking at the police investigating this case, it basically becomes like a 70s sitcom. Like,
Yeah.
it's very goofy. You see a lot of shenanigans with the cops being silly, especially one particular police officer whose nickname is Sparkplug. And it's fine for entertainment purposes, but it's like, clearly I don't think any of this really happened this way.
Yeah.
And again, when you're dealing with subject matter where it's like, oh, this was like a spree killing and people really died, and you go to the point where the narrator at the end of the film is actually saying where everybody is, at that point when the film was released.
Yeah.
It's very weird. And also that too, like Sparkplug, I'm sure clearly never existed because they never say what he's up to.
Right.
Because I don't think he's real.
So yeah, no, exactly. No, Sparkplug I know was not real, but some of these other people, they either were based on, they did change names for the movie, even of the investigators. So they were either based on a person, like, RJ Sullivan is based off of not the RJ Sullivan, Captain JD Morales, the main guy in it, who is like your walking like hard boiled like Texas Ranger type. He's unintentionally hilarious, but he's based on the lead investigator in the case. But then other people, like other deputies and stuff, are like amalgamations of people, to make sure the plot moved along and stuff. But no, Sparkplug did not exist. And you're right, when you are dealing with something that is real like this, you kind of touch on this whole topic of, is this insensitive? And I feel like, because specifically with this case, because it was kind of, I don't know how much people remembered of the case at the time, because this did get international and national attention when it was happening in the 40s. I don't know how much of it people really remembered, and maybe they were like, we're okay kind of making this sort of funny. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not like, you're walking into like, a movie based on this week's mass shooting and, everybody's faces are fresh. That doesn't make it right.
The new musical from Ryan Murphy, Columbine.
Oh my God. I would not put it past them. I really would not. But since you brought
it does not offend me. I'm sure, if you put this in front of some extra sensitive types, they'd probably want this movie burned. It didn't bother me. My theory as to what's going on is that this was kind of heavy subject matter, and the murder side of the story is why it is so talked about in the horror community, because it was very forward thinking of how brutal and scary, like, that'll be my next talking point, is this film as an important point in film history in this era. But I think that it would have been a lot for people to handle. So they needed some levity. And so they were like, okay, we'll have like, the scenes are going to be really intense when, the people are getting murdered. But to balance that out, we got to have a goofy character. How about, let's call him Sparkplug, and let's make him borderline like criminally negligent and stupid, and have him crash police cars.
Well, and I don't know,
and threaten people over the phone.
Oh man, I love that when he's telling her, if you whatever with your dog, I'll come and put like 6 holes in its head myself. And I love the guy's like, you can't threaten the citizens. Like, that's not our job. We're supposed to like I always think that interaction is so hilarious. He's like, oh yeah, I get it. Then goes back to threatening. Oh my god. But since you talked about the tonal inconsistencies and how, kind of be sort of off-putting, I thought I'd read you some of the reviews, because although this was successful at the time, it was not received well.
Interesting. So it was like critically panned,
Yes.
commercially successful. Okay.
And we do name drop some of its contemporary films with it. For example, Variety says Pierce inserts bloody murders into the pick like clockwork, and that's all there is to it. The film never reaches the truly frightening level of Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh,
A much more stylish exploitation pick with a similar theme. And then the Los Angeles Times called it this week's trash picture. No discernible point except to depict a series of particularly grisly killings with lingering graphic morbidity. So we have one of our favorite, Siskel.
Woo!
He gave it a half a star out of 4, calling it a dumb film that ends unsatisfactory without our knowing who the killer is, his motive, or whether he's now dead or alive. Which I'm like, dumb film, but that's
someone
the
needs
story.
to tell Siskel that we never caught the killer.
Right? And then
we don't know. I mean,
it says, and then the New York Times wrote, a couple of professional actors, Ben Johnson and Andrew Prine, head the cast, but the film looks non-professional in every other respect. Variety also compared it to Dirty Harry. They said it doesn't really delve into the hysteria such healings cause among police and citizenry the way Dirty Harry did. However, the Delta Democrat Times, I don't know where that is, they gave it 3 out of 5. Basically praising Ben Johnson's performance. It says it doesn't have a strong ending, but somebody else in it. Oh, Pierce, which I don't know who. Oh, Pierce, the director. Sorry, gives it one of the most credible jobs of engineering the tense, horrifying murder scenes. And then we have Charles B. Pierce responding, and I think you're about to touch on this when you talk about the horror aspect of it. This is his sort of response, particularly in reference to discussing the famous trombone scene.
Oh boy.
He says, I've been accused of going a little too far off the deep end with that trombone scene, but it worked. When the picture played opening night in Texarkana, a lot of people were there who had grown up during that time. When that trombone scene was over, you could have heard a pin drop. I'm telling you, everybody was just frozen. But they just go on to say that recently people have re-examined it and found great stuff about the film. And I do think there's some great stuff here. Because you were such a film aficionado, when I rewatched this, I was like, oh my god, he is going to roast me for this pick. But I'm glad that's not totally the case. But you want to talk about the horror aspect.
Yeah, well, I'll start off. It's funny that Variety brings up the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because as I was 15 minutes into this film, I was texting you being like, this reminds me of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Right.
Because they both open with narration that's very, like, blunt.
Yeah.
They both claim that it's based on true events, which half true with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I do think that Tobe Hooper's film was inspiration for how to film the murder scenes in this, because I still think, as I was texting you that day, you would probably like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre if you like this, because what that film is this film minus any of the silliness. Which is also why it's not a slasher. So this film came out in a time that was very transformative for cinema.
Right.
The 70s, I feel like if you ask teenage whiskey, like, oh, what's like the worst era of film, I probably would have said the 70s, but that's not the case. There was a lot happening. If you go back to season 1 of this show, we did a really good review on the Poseidon Adventure, and I was kind of harping on in that episode about how that film felt kind of like one of the last films from classic Hollywood before you got into like Spielberg and Coppola, right, and Scorsese and all, because they had kind of this new way of looking at film, and they filmed things in a much more like inventive kind of way. whereas that felt like classic Hollywood with some nightmarish, visuals of like, industrial decay and destruction of the ship flipping over and stuff like that.
Right.
I think so. It has been a time before we have like talked about slashers. At the beginning of us starting this podcast, I think everyone was probably, you especially, I think were under the impression it was like my favorite horror subgenre.
Right.
Especially when you're starting a show like our show, it's kind of a big jumping off point because it's a huge phenomenon in the 80s. It was like when you thought of horror in the 80s, you thought of slasher films. It was like a giant phenomenon. But they didn't exist before to the same extent. Like there's people I'm sure who would argue like Psycho is a slasher film. But I haven't gone into it in quite a time, but like it's not just about a killer going after victim after victim after victim. Like there's a style to slashers. There is an element of mystery, not even mystery. It's more of like a urban legend. That's the word I used. The killer's
antagonist. They can't.
And
die.
that's one of the right. And that's one of the things I would say if someone tried to call this film a slasher is like there's no mythos behind the Phantom Killer. It's just no one knows who he is. If you talk about Friday the 13th, Jason has this like backstory that the counselors tell each other over, the fire, like, oh, and he's going to get you too. In Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger was like this notorious child murderer who, oh my God, like he left like this kind of imprint on that neighborhood that's like still talked about almost kind of like he's a boogeyman, and then he literally becomes a boogeyman being able to get you in your dreams.
Right.
The tagline for Halloween, which most people consider to be the first slasher, is "The Night He Came Home." And that's important because they're not saying the night Michael Myers came home. They just say he, because there is so much. Everyone knows who he is in the context of the movie. You, the viewer, the person looking at the poster, like, who's he? And that's why you buy the movie ticket.
Yeah.
But everyone in that neighborhood knows about Michael Myers and knows that he murdered his sister when he was like 10 years old. So there's that. There's kind of an element of silliness to them as well. They kind of came later on. There's no silliness. You could argue maybe with the trombone scene that it's not as scary as it was in 1976.
I don't know. It's pretty. I wouldn't say it's scary. It's pretty disturbing.
Yeah. It's the sort of thing, but I could see someone maybe trying to argue that that's like a silly kill like you'd see in like an 80s slasher. It's not played for laughs. Like the thing about even someone like Jason Voorhees in the 80s, it's like his kills were ridiculous. He would, in the 3D movie, fire a spear gun and the spear would go through someone's head and out towards you if you're wearing the 3D glasses. There's, and usually there was an element of like special effects. Tom Savini did the special effects for the first Friday the 13th. So even though it's not that impressive by today's standards, Kevin Bacon getting a spear through his chest was like cutting edge visual effects at the time. So there's an element of fun to slashers that isn't in this film.
And you and I have talked about that because I've been like, what is this deal with this movie has good kills? And I'm like, that sounds like, and you had to kind of explain to me this phenomenon of what horror fans enjoy. The silliness comes from the absurdity of how it happens.
The absurdity and like there's depending on the franchise too, because Friday the 13th kind of relished in the fact that it knew movie critics hated it, so we didn't get so much. We've only reviewed the first film in the series, but there's some kills in the Friday the 13th series that are almost like you're laughing because of how ridiculously mean-spirited it is. I just sent one of my favorites is from Friday the 13th 2, and so one of the camp counselors is in a wheelchair, and it's horrible. It's horrible. But like one of the kills is just him getting like a machete or a meat cleaver to the face. But then to add insult to injury, his wheelchair starts rolling backwards into some stairs, and then it's just him falling down the stairs.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like so the audience would be like, well, maybe he's okay. Oh well, now he really isn't. It's like that.
Yeah,
scene.
and just like.
It's that scene
It's
from
just
Groundhog's Day when the car explodes and he literally says what I just
yes.
said. Oh, I guess
Yes,
now he's
exactly. Like, oh, maybe he's okay. Yeah, and again, it's like you're not laughing because like he deserved it or anything. It's just kind of like it's almost like shock laughing. Like, oh, you know, you wouldn't do that to the character in a wheelchair. That's not nice. Like he's already you know, disabled. You wouldn't want to like, oh, he can't die. Oh, he's dead, but they're not going to kill him off in a way that makes you laugh at him, like, you know.
Yeah.
And then they do. It's like, again, that was Friday the 13th specifically. They knew that critics hated him, and so they kind of leaned into it and tried to make the movies a little bit offensive.
Yeah.
And that was specific to that series. And that's like one way you could say the kills are like fun for that.
But you know what's funny about this is because you, like you said, this is like a pre-slasher sort of almost kind of helping set up the genre. It's not slasher per se, but what's interesting about, and you talked about how what's different about this movie as opposed to the other one is the other ones, it's like there's some lore already. And
yeah,
what's funny about this is because since this one essentially came before all these other ones, and there was even in the universe there wasn't a lore for this character. So I think it's interesting how this one that kind of helps set up the genre in a way didn't have a lore to begin with.
The last thing I was going to touch on as far as like slasher history in the 70s, we talked about this. Man, was it really two Halloweens ago? When we were talking about Suspiria, which is still a good review for anyone who wants to check that one out. But I talked about Jallo films in that review.
Yeah.
And that's another bit of history that kind of came into the slasher DNA. Jallo films, just to reiterate, in case you haven't heard that episode or you don't know what it is already, the word means yellow, and it's a reference to crime pulp novels in Italy because they always had yellow covers. And so Dario Argento, among others, were like famous Italian directors who did Jallo films, which are very similar to slashers, but are distinct because they have their own DNA. Usually those are murder mysteries where you do find out who the killer is at the end. They're known for the killer always wearing black gloves, and usually that was to mask the gender, you know, so you didn't know if it was a man or a woman. And they also did tend to have very stylized kills. So they have like a lot in common with slashers, but again, with slashers, it's like there's no mystery to who the killer is. It's usually some sort of supernatural or otherwise like scary murderer with like a background or an urban legend behind them. Whereas in Jallo films, you don't know who the killer is, and that's part of the fun. It's very Scooby-Doo, but with lots of blood. And those were big in the 70s. The two that I wrote down from Dario Argento, Deep Red, 1975, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, 1970. So those also were really popular in the, I believe, late 60s to, you know, throughout the 70s. And I think some of the, maybe even John Carpenter might have said that they were inspired by that subgenre of Italian horror. But even if there's no one on record saying it, you can see the influence, and that's kind of a big thing with slashers are a melting pot. There's a lot of elements from previous types of horror movies in them. And I think this film was a stepping stone into that. And it took elements from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but because there weren't a lot of films this brutal outside of that, like they wanted to, you know, lighten the mood, and they added some comedy. Yeah. And I thought that was kind of interesting with you going through all the reviews, because some people said, like the Variety review said that the comedy sucked, and like essentially it's like this pales in comparison to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then people like Siskel said like, oh, the murder is awful and this film sucks because there's too much violence. Right. So that's kind of the other thing with trying to play it both ways, is not everybody's going to be happy. You know, Variety, it wasn't violent enough, and Siskel, it was too violent. So it's kind of like you got to pick a tone and stick with the tone, or else people are going to be confused. Or at least critics will be. I guess general audiences liked this just fine.
So in modern retrospect, in modern reviews of it, FearNet, Scott Weinberg from FearNet, he said it's the most, accomplished feature film from the late Charles B. Pierce. Talk about the director. He did not like the voice. I like the voiceover, but he didn't like the voiceover. But he says some moments that seem plucked straight out of 1970s police procedural 101, including a few painful moments of cop-related comic relief. In Bloody Disgusting, I don't know what their rating system is, but they gave it 5 skulls. Patrick Cooper said the only parts that fumble a bit are the regrettable comedic moments. Those well-intentioned bits sharply interrupt the serious ambiance of the film, but at least they're few and spaced far enough between that they don't ruin the whole thing. So, and I think what both these reviews get right about this movie is it really does create an atmosphere, and definitely a very tense one. And I think that's what I've always felt is what makes this movie stand out a bit from, like, and again, I know you don't classify it as slashers. One of these guys from these fear websites called it true crime slasher subgenre. That's what they called it. Is I really think is this not only is but it's the tone, and I think it's kind of like a Michael Myers. The fact that this guy never talks, we never see his hands either. We know he has blue eyes, and that's pretty much it. And I don't know, something about just the simplicity of his character design is what really sells it. I think if you kind of look at iconic horror villains, you think of Jason, you think of Michael Myers, they're very simplistic characters too. They basically have like one outfit and they wear a mask. And so the guy who played Michael Myers in the original Halloween is famously not credited as Michael Myers. The credit is The Shape. So that gives you kind of an idea. It's like Michael Myers is The Shape. Like he is such an imposing force that he's like symbolic in and of himself. And I got that a lot from this guy too. And there was also an element of mystery where you're almost kind of like looking at the bag on his head, trying to figure out what his face looks like, because you don't know who this guy is. And that was like kind of a thing. You would see him throughout the film, but they showed his feet. Yes. And I love that.
Oh, I love that too. It kind of highlights what's scary about this story is that it was just someone living in this town was doing this.
Exactly. And it kind of also highlights, because people always talk about escaping, to small town, to get away from, the whatever in the big city, the crime, whatever. But it's like, when you're here, if somebody's getting away with crime, you will know them, but you won't know it's them.
Yeah.
Because like very specifically, they showed him going to the grocery store. They showed him in that dining room where they were having that psychoanalyst discussion. And I think quite prominently at the end of the movie.
Yes, going to see the movie.
Exactly. And I do think there's something interesting about that. It's a little bit of a pat on the back to himself showing that movie, but I think it's really important for the suspense and the overall tone of the movie that happens, because it kind of makes you turn and look to the person next to you. Are you them?
No, and that's the talking about how this was kind of influenced by other films. That element of mystery kind of reminds me of a Jallo film, except you don't ever find out who the killer is. And that's a point of criticism I don't agree with a lot of, and I like how with the newer reviews you're not really getting people complaining about the ending.
Yeah,
I get that it's a letdown, but they did what they could. I actually am going to give the filmmakers a lot of credit, because I knew when it was happening, I'm like, oh, this is the climax, because they say at the very beginning of the film, like, oh, this killer was never caught, so going into it, like, you're never going to find out who he is.
Oh, but that's actually true. They just at the beginning. Someone's like, what were these people complaining about? They told you from the beginning this is what's going to happen.
It's why I'm rolling my eyes at people like Siskel and stuff who are like complaining about like, oh, the ending was unsatisfying. What do you want, man? They never do you want them to like make up a fake character and claim that they caught the guy? So like they did the best they could. The ending I thought was pretty nice, where they, the cops, I don't know if this ever actually happened, but like they're chasing him down. He tries to shoot one of the cops. they get the upper hand, and then the guy's racing to get across the train tracks, and he is able to make it right as the train's crossing, and then they're shooting at him from underneath the train tracks, and they get him in the leg, and then it's like, okay, I just got to wait for that train to go by, but he runs off. And it's very suspenseful, and obviously they weren't going to catch him and stuff. And I get where it would feel anticlimactic to film critics at the time, but again, it's kind of like, well, what do you want them to do? Like they warn you at the beginning that they don't find out who did this. Right. They don't find out who did this because it's a real case. And they did the best they could to have something exciting happen before the ending, whether it happened in reality or not. So like the ending to me is fine. It's going to be, if you're the type of person, I get this with true crime on YouTube, where I hate unsolved cases because they pick at your brain, right? Because you want to know, you want to know what happened.
I go down.
Yeah, I end up watching them anyway, but it's just like the most unsatisfying thing because you never find out what happened to these missing people or who killed this person. So just by nature, it's going to be unsatisfying. But again, what more could they have done for you?
This would be how I would fix the ending. I don't think there's anything wrong with the ending, but if I wanted to up it, this is what I do, and I've actually thought about this, especially with you talking about how it is a stepping stone for slashers. Because what is one of like the hallmarks of the slasher? The unkillable killer sort of thing. They're almost like it's a supernatural entity of themselves. I would love for if after they shot and they're waiting for him and then he's gone, they didn't show us him running off after that. I kind of like just sort of like the tone of just like the dead silence of that moment, and then just like a phantom, he was gone. It's like, what I'm trying to say? You guys got close enough, too close, I'm just gone, I'm out of here. But like, it kind of, without us showing him running away, it gives us that, just sort of eerie feeling. Was this even a real person, or is this, like you talked about, the Shape with Michael Myers? Was this just evil personified? And I feel like that would have been a really great way. And I feel like it'd be interesting if we come back to the end where the movie comes out. He shows up at the movie and it's like, is he back, or is he admiring his handiwork, or is he back to strike again? You know what I'm trying to say? That would have been the only thing I would have loved to have changed about the ending of this movie, because the fact he's not caught is not unsatisfying to me. I think I've just been desensitized by like 38 seasons of unsolved mysteries. But that would have been the thing I would have loved. They kind of like, it gives that question down. Was this even a real person to begin with?
And speaking of the Phantom, like I think one thing I want to talk about, you kind of talked about how, like, performance-wise, I don't know who played the Phantom. If it was just like a bunch of
Bud Davis. I don't know anything about him.
The physicality of the performance, because we've already mentioned how the murder scenes are the strongest part of the film, and they feel the most ahead of their time. And part of it is the performance of the victims. Like, Jesus, those screams from the women are like bone chilling. Like, very, very. And the guy tends to have like abilities that don't. They describe him as being very strong, but kind of like Jason Voorhees. Like, I remember the bit where the couple's trying to drive away, and then he's like holding on to the car outside, and is somehow. Stuff like that, like, he seems inhumanly strong.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that reminds me of Jason Voorhees, because another time, it's the final killing before the end of the movie, but it's of a couple in their own home.
Yeah.
Which, that's the other thing that's great about it, is it escalates. At first, it's like, a couple that's like outside already, so he has the jump on them. Then it's a couple that is out in the country in their car, but they know about the killer, so they don't leave their car, and they still get got anyway. Then it's like it escalates to people not even outside anymore because everyone's afraid to leave their home, so then it's someone in their own home. And that is like the most slashery like killing, because it feels like, what more could they have done to be safe? Like, he shoots some guy from outside, And then the bit that really feels like Jason Voorhees is when he just rips the door off, like to get at the wife. Like that's the sort of thing. In fact, Jason was very famous for crashing through windows and breaking doors down. So like that felt very ahead of its time, and it also felt like something that would happen in those future slasher films. And it mirrors the physicality of Leatherface. Like that's another thing. Like with those films, is like Leatherface he was very strong, and he was very efficient. There wasn't a lot you could do to struggle because he got the jump on you, and it was like a great white shark hunting. You know,
Yeah.
You're swimming, and then the shark air jaws you. So that was something I thought was interesting.
Well, it's
and
interesting you
felt
point that
very
out.
ahead of its time.
Yes, it did. And I really did think they kind of did their best to balance the myth and the man of this person. You know, there's even theories going as far back as to believe that in real life that the killer, this was like dry runs for the Zodiac. Some people believe that, you know, there's just so much. And I think you said by kind of making him have like, or portraying him to have these basically supernatural door busting abilities, having him strike where you're comfortable. Really, I keep harping on this, but it's like, you're so right. So many of this stuff is just precursor to stuff that we've kind of taken for granted of, or like almost at this point, almost grown tired of seeing in the slasher genre, even though this isn't slasher per se.
And I'm gonna retract what I said about Bud. I'm like looking at his stunt work, and it looks like he's not. For some reason, he's attached overall to like 2 Friday the 13th films, but I'm not seeing him here. So maybe he played Jason, but I'm not seeing it in his stunt work, which is interesting. So sorry.
He was like, never mind, credit retracted. I did
Credit
think this...
retracted. He might have, again, for some reason it's coming up, so maybe he worked on those films, but he was not playing Jason. But it would make sense, because Jason has been played by different stuntmen over every movie. It was a different person essentially playing him, because it didn't matter, like he's wearing a mask. Or, you know, if you go back to the first Friday the 13th, it's not even Jason doing the killings. So...
But did they actually have that actress play that role?
I think they just had a person. Like, they didn't need her on set until the very end, because she was like a real actress. So she, you know, they didn't want to pay her unless you needed to.
That
so
poor
I'm guessing they
actress
just
that got doxxed.
Seriously.
Funny thing, I wanted to touch briefly on this, and I know this was unintentional, but it's just, you know, modern reading of back events when they had their, and this is just wild because this happens before, I think, arguably one of the most disturbing scenes in the movie, the trombone murder.
Yeah.
Right before that, we had the cops in drag doing stakeouts.
Oh man, I almost forgot about that. That was interesting for the 70s. I'm sure.
I thought was interesting for the 70s. They all, you know, like, because back then, masculinity macho, especially in the 40s, which is when this takes place. But then, so we had Sparkplug, you know, he was dressed as one of the dates. What I always found, I don't know, I always read way too much into the scene, but the guy that he's with, I think, is just a little too comfortable pretending this is a date. And I wonder if I don't think that was intentional, but I almost kind of like give like a queer reading in it. Like, did we have a secretly queer character in this movie? I
think because of the time the film was made, I think it was meant to be funny.
Well, I mean, it was still funny, but it was just like, he was like a little too into the bit.
Oh, I'm with you. If that really happened, I'd be like, I think you're joking a little too much about this.
I would be like, I think sounds like you got some secrets to share with the rest of us.
Exactly. Would you you know, the killer can't see that you're touching him under his dress, so why are you doing that? No, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I almost forgot about that scene. I would love to hear a queer reading of that scene, because to me, again, I feel like it was a very insensitive time period, and considering that they were not exactly being careful to be respectful to the families of the deceased.
Yeah.
I feel like that was probably just to entertain, because I'm guessing like this did really well at the box office. This is the kind of film I imagine was just full of teenagers, like, ooh, we're gonna get scared, and ooh, oh, they're on a date just like we're on tonight.
Yeah.
Ooh, maybe we're gonna be the next one. They never caught the guy, so I imagine it was just kind of low hanging fruit for teenagers to laugh at.
Yeah.
But I do think it plays differently today. Not even like, again, some people would find it offensive. I feel like
he was a little too comfortable cozying up a spark plug. That's all I'm gonna say.
I wish there was more I could talk about with it, right? Because like if it really happened, then I could really kind of deep dive into it.
Well,
but
they actually,
as it is,
they did do stakeouts like this. Now, I can't say this interaction took place. I can't say in the 40s maybe it, stirred up some deep, dark emotions inside some of these guys. But they did do these stakeouts in drag for couples.
What's funny about that, too, it's like the fact that did really happen, I think it just kind of shows how primitive policing was back in those times, because it sounds like something a kid would think to do.
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's going after couples. Why don't we dress one of you up like a woman, and then here's an idea, guys. How about you have more unmarked patrols? Right. How about that? How about you just like don't put out a curfew and you just have like 50 times as many officers just driving around out in the country, just driving around, because you're more likely to find him, especially if they're not police cars, because he might just attack the cops thinking that they're, a couple of dudes just out drinking in the woods or something.
Right.
So I'm sure you're wondering what I think of the movie, or what rating I would give.
What are your final ratings and your final thoughts on this very special of movies that I feel better now that we've talked about it, because I was worried to be like, dude, this is trash. What did you make me watch? But I'm glad you're one of those people that's able to kind of see how special it is at the same time as, being like, well,
I think it's historically important. I think its DNA would, contribute to what a slasher film in the 80s would be. And I think that its mistakes were good lessons to learn about how not to handle subject matter like this.
Yeah.
It sounds like, because you talked about some horror publications that reviewed this favorably, but they still kind of gave it a low score. I was entertained. I mean, you can argue for or against that based on the fact this is a real story. I think given the amount of time that has passed, I would be shocked if there were any surviving family members from any of these victims who would really care. I still think it should be treated with respect. I was entertained. It's stupid. I think that the tonal inconsistencies kind of are a mess, but I enjoyed watching it. So, for better or for worse, I'm going to give it 3 out of 4 shots of whiskey, because it's a fun watch. It's a great film for screening in the park in your local neighborhood, and it is genuinely pretty scary, at least for the scenes that are trying to be scary.
Yeah. And
I think the humor has aged better because of how stupid it is. I think that the lighthearted parts are so bad that they're good.
Well, they almost have
I was laughing because I was just like, what is this? Spark plug, and he's crashing the police car into the bog.
They almost have a Smokey and the Bandit feel to them.
Yes, they do, especially the car chase.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the drag scene. I sound like I'm praising it for being bad, but there is almost kind of this charming quality of what the hell were they thinking at the moment,
right?
That makes it entertaining. So if you want a true crime, serious Zodiac style Fincher movie, that's not this. That's never going to be this. So yeah, 3 out of 4 for me. What about you?
I'm gonna give it 3 out of 4. My biggest complaint with this movie, and I don't even think I mentioned this because I couldn't find the source for this, but I remember reading this, and I think it comes through, is I think he hired a lot of local talent for this, And so for some
Yeah.
of the smaller characters, the acting doesn't come across as well. And I'm very much like, as much as I love set design and costumes and, you know, over the top stuff like this, I can be forgiving of a film if, you know, the character. So my big thing besides the tonal consistencies was just for the smaller characters, I wish we'd had more. Um, I don't want to like trash people for being local actors. Like I just wish that.
You know, I'm gonna say you can, because do you know another little horror film that used local talent? A little film called Night of the Living
That
Dead has some very great. Not all of the actors in that film are good, but it does prove that you can get local theater actors to put a good performance on for a movie. So I will counter with that. Like
okay.
you can find good local cheap actors.
I wish then that like especially in the police scenes, I wish the background actors and stuff, not the background, but the not as high profile roles had been a little bit better. Although I do give props to the director taking on the most ridiculous role for himself. Um, I actually do think he was trying to be somewhat sensitive by taking on that role himself. But I do think
Wait,
that
who did the director
he
play?
played Sparkplug.
That's funny. Oh dang, I didn't know. That's pretty crazy, actually. That's wow. Good on him.
Well, maybe that other guy who's playing the other cop, maybe was just like enamored by the Hollywood glow. Um,
Right? He was like, "Oh, this is how I get into the next movie."
they suck into the next movie exactly. So that is my biggest way. The tonal thing I can kind of just be okay with because I feel like just somebody like that I was raised on 70s and 80s TV, and a lot of like serious shows have these quirky goofy, it's like that person once said, it's like police procedurals 1970s 101. And so I can be more forgiving about that. But the good news is I don't think those scenes though really take away from the scenes that need to be disturbing or super disturbing. Like that opening scene is not graphic at all. Oh, I mean, it's frightening, but it's not graphic. But it's so
Yeah.
disturbing because you aren't expecting any of that. And the overture and score for the movie is really good. There's so much to like about this movie that I just wish they had left it alone, or if they'd done like a remake or whatever, it had been more of in the spirit of the original. Maybe twerking the, you know, like you said, the tone a little bit better actors, but I wish that's like kind of what they had done. But this is
I
still
name dropped David Fincher. If he made a version of this, I think it would be really
that
good.
would be amazing. I think that would be great. But I'm gonna give this 3 out of 4 as well. This is one that I really enjoy. This is my, I know we've discussed that it's not true slasher, but for the longest time, this was my first slasher film that I literally only watched because of the true crime aspect. And that's one thing I like about this. It's scary with a little bit of history in there. There is some humor. But I don't think it actually ever kind of really sort of shies away from the fact, basically the core thing of this, you don't know, even in a small town, who your neighbors are really. And so yeah, 3 out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea for me.
And we don't know who our listeners are. So why don't you tell us in the comments? At least if you're listening to this on YouTube Music.
You know, we're gonna get a comment from a channel called Phantom Killer. He's gonna be like, I'm back.
Right? There's going to be a comment that says, "I'm thinking of doing something to you."
Oh God.
Shout out to anyone who watched The Chair Company this year. But thanks for listening, guys. We are concluding another year of this podcast. Before we started recording, T was telling us some of our analytics for the year, and it's very nice. Thank you to anyone on Spotify who discovered us this year. Apologies again for finding out that somehow we hadn't been uploading for over a year. So thank you for rediscovering us if you were wondering what happened to us. It won't happen again. But yeah, this is the last pairing of the year. Let us know, seriously, if you're able to comment on anything, like if you like this new way of posting the whole pairing, both episodes at once. because that's the plan for next year. So hopefully you guys
Unless y'all
like
say
it.
you
That
hate
way you
it.
can, right? So we'll see how that goes, but that way you guys can choose which one you want to listen to first. If you like the kind of theming of what we're doing, you can listen to both of them. You know, more content for you. There's probably going to be bigger gaps in between posts because of that, but I think you'll have a lot to like listen to. We got the finale coming up. For anyone new to our show, you'll see what that is. We have a little drinking game that you can play along with.
I'm already going to spoil it. I'm going to have to take the penalty shot.
There's a penalty shot to be taken, but this one will hopefully not be like 4 hours long. There were a lot of movies that came out this year. I tried to keep up on the horror since I only watched like 2 or 3 last year.
He never saw Weapons, everybody. He never saw Weapons. Jump on him. Attack.
Oh, help. No. You kidding me? Weapons, I definitely would. I watched it while eating Campbell's chicken noodle soup.
Oh my god.
No, but so we got that coming up. Check out our other episodes. Should be posted at the same time as this one. But until next year, I've been Whiskey.
I've been Sweet Tea.
Keeping it Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese.
Peace out, guys. Happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah. Merry Christmas. All that
Happy
jazz.
Kwanzaa. Happy Ramadan.
All hail Xenu.
Spaghetti Monster. You got any of those in the chat?
Yeah. The Spaghetti Monster. May your... I don't even know. See you next time, guys. It's been a great year.
Bye, y'all. Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and programmed by Jamie King. Original music is provided by Pat Mars and original artwork by Asa Esparza.